We have unconfirmed reports this morning that a plane has crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center.
I live in Battery Park City, right next to the Twin Towers, and I looked up and the side of the World Trade Center exploded right when I looked up.
And happened again. Unconfirmed report that a plane has crashed into one of the towers there. We are efforting more information on this subject.
I just witnessed a plane that appeared to be cruising slightly lower than normal altitude over New York City, and it appears to have crashed into, I don't know which tower it is, but...
We believe that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center in New York. That happened within the last...
has crashed into the World Trade Center. We don't know anything more than that. We don't know if it was a commercial aircraft. We don't know if it was a private aircraft. We have no idea how many were on board or what the extent of the injury.
September 11th. It was a Tuesday morning, and I had gotten into the office just a little after 9, a little before 9 o'clock, I think it was, and was doing some stuff. And then I remembered I had to get something in the closet downstairs, and I don't know why I remember this, but I remember walking down the staircase right by our welcome center, and I remember hitting the floor, and then getting a phone call, and I looked, and it was from somebody who would normally probably wouldn't call me. And I picked it up, and this woman said, Pastor Tim, a plane just hit the World Trade Center.
So the day of September 11th, I was at work that day. One of my colleagues told me that a plane had just hit the first tower of the World Trade Center. And I thought, oh, must just be like a sightseeing plane or something small.
So I was a 9th grader, and we were in art class. And he heard the news, my art teacher, over the radio. And so I think there was this surreal feeling at first, just not really knowing if it's true or not yet.
I was in 5th grade, and I grew up in northern Bergen County, so not too far from New York City. It was a beautiful day. The most perfect blue skies, not a cloud in the sky. And while I was in school, they wouldn't allow us outside for recess. And at the time we were like, well, why not? It's a beautiful day and it's recess. But they weren't really explaining anything to us about why we couldn't go outside.
So I worked at Macy's Herald Square in their corporate headquarters, which was right on 34th and Broadway. I called my dad, I forget why, but he told me, it was around 8:30 or so, and he's like, a plane just, went into the tower. And I'm like, what, like, a little propeller plane? He's like, yeah, I'm not too sure. Well, we soon found out that it was a lot more than that.
All of a sudden, we heard that a second plane had hit the other tower. And I will never forget, as long as I live, the feeling I had. It was a feeling of terror. You knew that's not an accident.
I was on the 18th floor and we looked straight down Broadway, so we could see everything out of the windows there. We're sitting in the office and we just really didn't know what to do. Do we leave? Where can we go? We just didn't know what to do.
At the time, Amy, my wife, was 8.5 months pregnant. And I remember calling home, just gripped with fear, telling her, just hang tight, I'm on my way home. Don't worry, just lay low till I get there.
I remember a lot of teachers crying. And we still didn't know what was going on. We were kids. They weren't telling us what had happened, but we thought it was strange that a bunch of teachers were just crying, and tons of kids were being called down to the principal's office because a lot of kids I went to school with, their parents worked in New York City or they worked in the World Trade Center.
By this time we were really panicked. I think it was when I had heard about the Pentagon that just put me really over the edge. I work in New York. You kind of expect bad things to happen. But when we found out about the Pentagon, we just grabbed whatever we could. There were 4 or 5 of us. We started to walk down 34th Street and we walked towards the water to get on a ferry.
I think there was that frenzy also when you heard like not just the second building, but other buildings being hit and almost a mass hysteria, how much planes actually crashed into what buildings.
Then we were getting word about another plane hitting the Pentagon, and then another one that may have crashed in Pennsylvania. And then they're saying, there's like hundreds of flights and we don't know where they're going. And I said, to Marianne, I remember saying, well, what should we do? I mean, should we go get the kids? They're in school. Our kids were all in school and nobody knew what to do.
We saw the plane hit the second tower and just the flames, and then thinking like, well, I'm sure they'll put it out. Like the furthest thing from people's mind was that the 2 towers would collapse, which they obviously eventually did.
This is as close as we can get to the base of the World Trade Center. You can see the firemen assembled here, the police officers, FBI agents, and you can see the 2 towers. A huge explosion now raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way!
It's like all of a sudden you look out the window and there's one standing. Then you look out the window again and there's nothing standing. And you're like, wait a second, where did it go?
For the rest of the morning, we were watching, and we watched in utter disbelief as these towers fell.
It was like literally someone hit a pause button on life. Everybody stopped what they were doing, just in disbelief about what was happening.
If you've ever been in New York City, you know it's the noisiest city in the world. And when we walked outside, there was not one car driving in the street other than emergency vehicles. Cabs were pulled over, they had radios on, and all we saw was smoke in the air. And it was the eeriest thing I've ever witnessed.
It was the first time I thought to myself, like, you hear about this stuff happening in other countries, but you never thought this could happen to us. I mean, we're America, right? We're invincible in some ways, at least I thought. But that was the first time I felt shaken, like, oh my gosh, like, it could be any of us, anytime.
Living in the West Essex area, a lot of people were lost from this area, people that worked in New York City, and never came home that day.
Growing up in Bergen County, we had lots of kids who their parents worked in New York or worked in the World Trade Center. Yeah, a lot of kids did lose their parents that day.
I went to school with a few people that had perished. It was just so sad. So sad, and of so many lives lost and tragically lost.
So at that time, I was really engaged in my local fire department. I was a battalion chief on Essex Fells Fire Department. And by the time I got home, the phone was already ringing for our department to go into New York City to serve as a volunteer. A small group went in, 4 or 5 firefighters, And I was getting reports from them about how scary it was, total lockdown, armored vehicles, military jets flying across the skyline. A lot of communications were down in New York City. The only thing that was working was fax machines. And they were faxing around the list of the firefighters who had perished in the two towers. And they just told me the fax machine was just page after page after page.
I have a friend, he would have been on right near the floors where the planes hit. And that day, he had somebody visit him. And he said, hey, let's go down, I think the 38th, it was somewhere in the 30s. Let's go down there to the restaurant and we'll have breakfast. And he said, as soon as they sat down, the plane hit and the building, I'll never forget, he said the building went this way, it went this way, and then it settled. And then he spoke about how they got into the staircase at that time and they started down and the firemen were going the other way. And he said he will never forget the faces of the firemen. He said every guy that they passed, and he looked at their faces, every guy died, every single one who passed him.
The fact that these guys went into this building without any clue of what they were facing, many of them probably knew they were not going to be coming back out, but they climbed the stairs anyway, just to try to get as many people out as they could. I can't imagine what it would be like for me to strap on a uniform and walk into a building not knowing if I'm going to be coming out. And just the incredible amount of courage that takes.
It was a frightening day. It was terrifying to then go back into the city after that. We were never quite the same. I worked in New York City for many years after that, and it's a day that I'll never forget. It's a day that has marked my life, but it's a day that I look back and just see God's blessing and hand and protection over my life and so many people that I care about.